around there. Raymond James, chief economist. Let's turn some news out of Italy. Juventus saying the Super League plan has few chances to be completed. My dear AC Milan says they must be sensitive on concerns over the Super League. It's just remarkable how quickly this whole situation has unravelled. Tom, I'll run through the price action quickly as well for us. No drama this Wednesday morning. Good morning to you all. Your equity market looks like this on the S&P 500, unchanged at 41.26 in the bond market. Yields up by not even a basis point now. Let's call it 157 on 10s. Euro dollar, Tom, just a little north of 120. We come in on the euro by about 1/4%.
Very good, John. John Farrell, Lisa Brownson, Tom Keene, we welcome all of you on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television worldwide to the very unretired Mark Carney of Canada and the United Kingdom, the former governor of the Bank of England, went right back to work after that tenure with the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and, of course, his work in other areas of finance. Governor Carney, thank you so much for joining us today. The Paris Accord unraveled, TPP unraveled. We now have Xi meeting with Biden over Zoom or whatever, and they're going to talk climate. What kind of agreement can we get from Biden Xi on climate?
Well, first, Tom, thanks for having me on. Biden, Xi, Suga, Trudeau, Johnson, 40 world leaders coming to this summit that the president's called for the next few days. I think we are going to see some big announcements from some of the G7 economies. I'll let them unveil those as they come. That's the first point. The second, it is encouraging that President Xi is part of this summit. It's also encouraging that the private sector is leading the way, and part of what's coming out on the eve of the summit, as you know, is a big announcement from the core of the financial sector.
Governor Carney, I'm going to make it real simple. You were born in the northwest of the Northwest Territories. I'm suggest none of our authorities have ever been as far to the Arctic Circle as you. The Arctic Circle is melting. Antarctica has glaciers moving. What is the urgency to a northern guy like you to get this done?
Well, there's an urgency. Yeah, absolutely. We did drag the G7 up to Iqaluit, you might remember, Tom, about 8 years ago. So they got close, and they started to see some of the impacts. Look, there is an urgency to this. We're tracking as a world. You said Paris didn't succeed. It succeeded in the objective. It got people in, but the policies are still consistent with a world that's north of 3 degrees, warming north of 3 degrees. So this is a critical year for action. There's tremendous momentum now. We need to reinforce that momentum, and again, having 70 trillion of private capital coming behind net zero, which is what's been announced today, is the type of momentum the world needs.
Let me ask a rude question. How do you convince the United States Senate? First, it's in the United States' interests directly in terms of the impacts of climate change. It's also fundamentally, and I'll refer to the comments of Secretary Blinken a couple of days ago, this is fundamentally becoming an issue of competitiveness, of economic competitiveness. The world is moving in this direction. The firms that are innovating, that are lower carbon, that are part of the solution, and the financial institutions that are getting behind those solutions aren't doing very well. They will do much better. This is where the world's headed. The question is pace. The U.S., as in many things, should be the leader, can be the leader, and those countries that are the leader will reap the rewards as they should.
I love that Tom's still referring to you as Governor Carney. Mark, should we continue doing that? Do you want me to keep that up?
That's an American thing.
I haven't done that for a long time.
We're not rude like you lads from Britain. We always do that. We
Well, Mark had to put up with a lot of that in the news conferences on Threadneedle Street. I'll go with it. Governor Carney, I remember a news conference at the back end of 2013. You were fresh in your tenure at the Bank of England, and everybody was worried about bubbles elsewhere and why we needed higher interest rates. And I remember a line from you: we don't set monetary policy for inside the circle line. Now, if you live in London or appreciate the underground system in London, you'll remember that quote and you'll know what it means. So, Mark, I want you to help us understand the moment we're in right now as well, the financial instability, stability concerns that go with very low and exceptionally low interest rates for a long time.
Two things, John. Thanks for remembering that. We do set financial stability policy for inside the circle line, or the equivalent in the U.S. and Canada, around the world. So it is very important that authorities are focused on pockets of excess, making sure that they don't spread more broadly within the financial system, and undermine the recovery, which, strong out of the gate, particularly in the United States, is really just getting going and needs to be followed through.
The word transitory keeps coming up again and again. You've been in a seat where you've seen above target inflation, north of 3%. Think of the turn of 2017, 2018. Mark, how different is this moment, do you think? You faced downside risk to growth at that time as well. Now we face upside risk to growth. How different is this moment?
It is different. I mean, we're in a unique situation given the nature of the pandemic. I won't list all the reasons why it's different, but in essence, it's a supply shock. It's hopefully a temporary supply shock. Part of getting out of this hole is big fiscal, much bigger than we saw 2008-9, and also a monetary policy that is explicitly targeting some degree of overshoot, a responsible overshoot of inflation. So it is quite different. But the combination of that mix is maximizing the prospects that we will get out of this. To loop back to the Biden summit, if I may, it's important what are we handing off to, though? We'll get this initial pop in the economy. We need an investment-driven recovery in order to really have traction, really have high-paying jobs. And that investment-driven recovery is going to be oriented. Part of it's around sustainability, a much more efficient economy. We need a financial sector that's there, and that's why having $28 trillion of balance sheet of banks led by Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Citi, HSBC, and others announced today. That's the kind of capital we're going to need in the U.S. and globally to have a sustained recovery.
So what are the negative consequences, Mark, of the incredible amount of fiscal and monetary stimulus pumped into the economy over the past 13 months? Is this just without harm?
Well, no. I mean, everything, I wouldn't say everything in moderation, but everything needs to be calibrated. The Fed and other central banks will have to make, as they always do, timely decisions on the tapering of stimulus, tapering first, and then in the fullness of time, with the recovery that we want and deserve, withdrawal of some of that stimulus. Fiscal stimulus in all jurisdictions needs to move more towards the type of support for private investment as opposed to sustaining individual consumption. I mean, and I'm saying that after the measures that have been passed in the United States and elsewhere. So there is a pivot of the policies coming, but where the policy stance is today needs to be seen through. But absolutely, Lisa, there are some tough decisions ahead.
Governor Carney, if it isn't inflation, when going back to your issue as a special envoy for the United Nations, Secretary Treasury Janet Yellen said that climate change was the biggest threat to markets. That was the biggest threat, frankly, existential threat to the way that we operate. And we've seen the Fed take a more active role. Can you dovetail how monetary policy fits in with climate policy?
Well, first and foremost, the Fed's actions are related to financial stability risks, what John was talking about earlier. So making sure that as we're in this transition, that lending, investing is consistent with the industries of the future and not those of the past, and we don't build up large losses in the core of the system. Monetary policy is going to have to largely, certainly in the United States, it's largely a question of the classic supply-demand shifts in the economy, so more traditional monetary policy. I will say in the UK and in Europe, the way monetary policy is operated, the type of collateral that's used, the type of assets that are purchased, will be influenced by climate policy, and as a consequence, that will be yet another influence on the pricing of securities.
Governor Carney, Chrystia Freeland is making really quite a splash in your Canada, and I want to take it globally, certainly G7 and G8, but actually globally. Do we see in Canada, as we come out of this pandemic, a new interpretation of what government will do? Chrystia Freeland has made worldwide news with a more liberal approach. Is that a tone of the future?
It's recognition. Aspects of the Canadian budget are recognition of the inequalities that still exist in this economy, and very important, I think, the centerpiece element in that budget is around childcare and universal childcare. And speak as an economist. I mean, we're moments from you talking about Granger causality and time series analysis. As an economist, one of the things, of course, with that is an issue of social justice. It also is an issue of supply capacity. More women in work, broader participation in the economy. That's good. It is right and it's just, but it also supports growth. But in Canada, as in the United States, what I was saying earlier, the shift from support needs to come from immediate support to households during the course of the pandemic, which is still